you ever dream you had a friend? Someone to last your whole life?
For you, I'd give up anything. You only have to ask.
Merchant Ivory, it was just a golden period.
I really can't think of any other director and producer who've made such a variety of films. I mean, basically, they made the films they wanted to make.
It was very unlikely that meeting of minds and bodies and love, that was a love story at first.
I could tell at a very early stage in the career that they were yin and yang.
It's good to see you, and a great film. I think it's one, in a review I wrote, it's one of those films that actually exceed one's expectations. It was so glorious. A celebration of two very talented men. Why did you make it?
Because Merchant Ivory, those films, especially A Room with a View and Maurice, those two films were just kind of important for my life. And then I'd say, by extension, Howard's End and Remains of the Day. So those four films, which I used to anchor the, my doc and, the structure, they were just very important to me. So I saw A Room with a View when I was in high school, and I fell in love with it. At the time, the choice was you could go and see Rambo at the movie theater, or you could go see A Room with a View. And somehow I gravitated toward A Room with a View. And then Maurice, I was a closeted gay kid living in upstate New York, and I worked at a high-end clothing store in Albany, New York. And the manager of that store gave me the VHS cassette tape of Maurice, and I sat in his apartment and I watched it, and it really changed my life because I loved the way those men were depicted. And I love what Merchant Ivory did with E.M. Forster's novel. And it was just transformative. And then just really quickly, Howard's End and Remains of the Day were what kind of propelled me to go to film school. So I went to USC. I got my master's, degree at USC, which is actually where James Ivory went to film school. And I went there in the mid to late 90s, and I went to film school. And really, those films were just all significant. And I've said this before, of course, I love other filmmakers. I, gravitated towards all kinds of different things. But because Merchant Ivory had such an effect on me at an earlier age, I followed them. And I was also aware that they lived in upstate New York, and I lived in upstate New York. And so there was like a bit of a connection there. And I was kind of like, well, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. And yeah.
So let's go back to the Maurice and explain to people who don't know the significance of it. Can you just give us a little background, how and why it was made?
Yeah, I mean, Maurice was made right after A Room with a View. So the way it's been framed by, several people, over time, but in my film, the executive producer, Paul Bradley, talks about this. The world was at Merchant Ivory's feet. They had this incredibly successful film. It was like a global kind of blockbuster art house film, A Room with a View. And they were really, at that point, they were being offered many, many different projects. But James Ivory was just, hell-bent on making Maurice. He felt that the time was right for it. It was something he wanted to do. It was a story that he wanted to tell and direct. And there were a lot of people wondered why they made that film. But really, I mean, it was important to Jim to make that film. And, I don't know, maybe it was because the AIDS crisis was raging at that point.
So maybe it's such a brave move to do it then.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, I heard from people that, a lot, like it didn't have like box office success like A Room with a View did, but it found its audience over time. And especially with the video cassette market and things like that, like it was out there. It had a huge, I mean, it did extremely well in Japan. So again, Maurice found its audience in various places, but it was not a significant success in the US or the UK when it was released. But it was just something that was important for Jim to make, and they moved fast on it. I mean, they moved fast.
Can I interrupt you? Did he know Ian Forster?
No. So he read that book. James Ivory read Maurice, the novel, when it came out. I think it came out in the 70s, the early 70s, when Ian Forster passed away.
Because that was what Ian Forster insisted on. It
That's
wasn't
right.
it wasn't to be published.
That's
and
right.
I wonder what it'd make of the fact it was then made into a movie. It probably turned it over his grave, do you think?
That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I gotta think he'd be, I don't know. I would think Ian Forster would be. I think most authors are kind of thrilled to see their books made into films. So
I don't want to give too much away, but there was one. You dot your movie with lots of anecdotes, some really good actors. But the one for Maurice really touched me. That Rupert Everett sat behind the two of them during the premiere, and they cried, and that really touched me too. How is it you got the creme de la creme of British actors working for you?
Right. But I think that speaks volumes to like how important these roles were for these people in their careers. So Hugh Grant, Maurice was his first film role. Helena Bonham Carter, A Room with a View, was her second film role. Emma Thompson was really doing comedy before she got Howard's End. And that was like, in a few Shakespeare things on the side, with Kenneth Branagh. But everybody appreciated the opportunity that they were given by Merchant Ivory. And I think even though like Emma Thompson didn't work with them again after Remains of the Day, I think that connection for her and that kind of appreciation of, hey, she won her first Oscar for Howard's End, right?
Yeah.
So they were willing to do it. A few people, like for example, Vanessa Redgrave said no first, and then she said yes. We got her to say yes a little bit later on. But and certain people said no. Like I couldn't get to Anthony Hopkins, and I couldn't get to Nick Nolte, but I was able to really reach a lot of people that were in front of the camera, but then a lot of people behind the camera, all the artisans, all their long-term creative partners that Merchant Ivory worked with over and over again, which again makes them an interesting kind of production company.
There's a lot of trouble with British movies for the American market because they often insisted on subtitles, but they really seem to really adopt and adapt and love the Merchant Ivory ones without this prediction. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I have to say, I think the film's going to do very well in the UK, even better than the US, because there's something about the sensibility of those films, the way, maybe it's the beauty of those films. I mean, again, certain people didn't appreciate them, like Alan Parker famously said, called them Laura Ashley filmmaking, which, Rupert Graves mentions in the film. But I think a lot of audiences really connected to these Merchant Ivory films, but I think it's because of the stories that they were based on. I think it's like the small character dramas, really delving into the characters. Look at Maurice, look at A Room with a View. Again, these are like universal choices these people were making. And so I really think it was the stories that attracted audiences first. But then I think there was an appreciation for kind of like the beauty that was created on really shoestring budgets, low budgets, which made these, challenging, these productions more challenging. But I think it's really the stories. And I think another thing is Ruth Habvala, the writer, because she was a novelist as well as a screenwriter, and she was a short story writer, she just was firing on all cylinders. She knew what she was doing. And I think that her talent as a writer is another thing that elevated these films and gave James Ivory the blueprint that he needed to go out and make the films.
But and you should explain it was like almost like a menage a trois with her involved, but it wasn't sexually. There's
Although we did have kind of the triangular relationship.
But Maurice was distinctively gay, except the rest were not particularly, but we consider them as queer filmmakers. I think. Where do they fit into the echelon of our history of gay filmmaking? How important were they to us?
I mean, I think they were extremely important. I think it was something that wasn't as recognized when those films were coming out, film after film, Quartet, Maurice for sure. But again, if you look at some of the other films, there's really, The Wild Party, which is a film that a lot of people don't know, which starred Raquel Welch from the 1970s. That had, incredible like LGBTQ plus representation all over that film. But I mean, and I think it was kind of like recognized, but maybe the critics weren't talking about it as much in the 1970s. But I think they're incredibly important, especially because there were three gay men. It was James Ivory, it was Ismail Merchant, and it was the composer Richard Robbins. Those three gay men. And Simon Callow says in my film, the actor Simon Callow says that Ruth was an outsider. The three gay men were outsiders. Ruth was an outsider because she was a German Jew who grew up in in the UK, in London, and then went to India. She was an outsider in India, just like James Ivory was an outsider when he was in India making his films. So there's something about that kind of like lens that an outsider kind of takes and kind of looks at society. E.M. Forster was an outsider. And you see these characters in the films, the Bostonians, Vanessa Redgrave, her character, definite outsider, lesbian. So again, they were making films with gay characters, for a long time before Maurice.
Could there be a Merchant Ivory pair today?
There could be, there should be. I don't know about the coming together in a long-term, partnership relationship, and then a director and a producer making 43, 44 feature films under their production company, kind of banner. It's absolutely possible where two people, can come together and just make films, film after film after film. Every single film that Merchant Ivory made, Ismail was starting at zero. He had to raise the money. I don't know. It makes you wonder, would there be people out there that could make 1 to 2 films a year, which is what they were doing when Ismail started directing in the later 1990s, early 1990s, all the way through to the early 2000s. They were sometimes making 2 feature films a year. That output is extraordinary. And to answer your question, I mean, it would be challenging for a new duo to come on the scene. And
we're going to see you soon in P-Town. What's the journey for the film?
We are wrapping up our film festival play now. So I was just at the Berkshire's International Film Festival. I have Provincetown, and then we go to Frameline. And then the film opens. So Cohen Media Group is my distributor. The film opens in New York City on Friday, August 9th. And then it'll open in Los Angeles the week after that. And then they'll open it in a few other markets. We were able to get a distribution deal with Curzon in the UK. And so we'll open in the fall. So I'm in really good shape. But again, it made sense for Cohen Media to take my film on because they own 30 films from the Merchant Ivory Library. Right. I would say the one thing that people say after they see my film is it makes them want to go back and explore and
so
watch.
Right.
Yeah.
We all feel the same.
Right. And so many people have never seen The Householder, have not seen Shakespeare Walla, have not seen The Bostonians. And so it prompts people to explore their earlier films and then revisit the films that they've loved.
What's next for you? Do you have another plan? Is there another gay couple you're going to follow?
No. I'm going to continue to chart my own gay path forward. So I'm making my first first narrative feature film. It's called Orientation. I'm shooting it in upstate New York next summer. And that's a coming of age story set in the summer of 1987. And it's a very tight structure. It basically takes place on a progressive liberal arts college during a kind of what was called a freshman orientation period, where students come to campus and they have like 4 days where they're away from home for the first time and they're exploring their lives and their worlds before they move into college for, for their freshman year. And so I have like 5 characters that I'm following in this story that takes place over 4 days. And I'm super excited to be shooting this. So
it sounds great, but don't you think it's a really good time, despite the political climate, how healthy queer cinema is right now?
Optimist. And I mean, look at Andrew Haig, right? He's going to be at Provincetown. All of Us Strangers, right? I mean, a lot of notice, a lot of, some good box office for that film. I just think, and that's one thing I guess I'd want to like leave on. I hope my film inspires other filmmakers. A lot of people, younger people, might know Call Me by Your Name, but which James Ivory won the Oscar for Best Screenplay for, but they don't know James Ivory. And I'm hoping that my film kind of, has its life and gets to film schools and inspires queer, new gay filmmakers, because Merchant Ivory did it, and they did it long term, and they made some beautiful, beautiful work under some, pretty tough circumstances, low budget filmmaking. So
I know they're going to love it here in town, because we're so Anglo-English anyway. I look forward to meeting you in the flesh, and good luck with the run of the film. And thank you for talking to me today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much too. Appreciate it.
Merchant Ivory, it was just a golden period.
I really can't think of any other director and producer who've made such a variety of films. I mean, basically, they made the films they wanted to make.
It was very unlikely that meeting of minds and bodies and love, that was a love story at first.
I could tell at a very early stage in the career that they were yin and yang.
From Ismail's point of view, Jim was going to bankrupt the business commercially, and Jim thought...